I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7 p.m. Please call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Present.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Ms. Mohammed?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch? Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford? With 5 present, 2 absent, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll now take a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. As we start each board meeting, it bears reminding that the mission of the Rockford Public Schools is to collaboratively engage all students in a first-class education for a changing world. Before we go any further, thank you to Connor Childers, who is working behind the scenes to produce the board's broadcast via YouTube live stream and Comcast Channel 20. We do not have any speakers, so I can skip that portion. Next on the agenda is the opportunity for comments from board members. Are there any board member comments? Okay, going once, going twice. Next item on the agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
Thank you, Mr. Rollins. I'm going to be deferring to Mrs. Detman, who's going to be reporting out on how our schools did on the first round of standards of practice implementation. This is something you're going to see from the district twice a year. I think it's important to recognize that this entire year was the first time schools experienced these standards of practice, so we're very much taking this as sort of the pretest. And we think there's going to be tremendous opportunities for improvement in both how we support schools, but also in terms of how schools perform. There were some tremendous bright spots. And some very obvious opportunities for improvement. You'll be hearing more about some of this from me as we look at some of my potential target areas for ideas for my CEO-centric target or targets for the year. I plan to focus some work on how we can better support standard practice implementation as one of the possible options. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mrs. Detman to give a very high-level overview of how our schools performed and how we performed at supporting them. The floor is yours, Mrs. Detman.
Thank you very much. So the Standards of Practice report tonight is kind of a culmination of a year-long conversation that we've been having about the standards of practice, how they were developed, how they were defined. This year, we began collecting data on them and engaging in observations and capacity building with our principals and assistant principals as well. So we always start with sort of the vision of where we want to be. This is our current state, which is a mix of red, yellow, green, and blue schools. And of course, our ideal state is that no matter where you live, you have a green and blue school. And standards of practice are how we define that in part. So we'll review that as a part of our report. As a reminder, this fits under the umbrella of the system-wide framework and is a major component, the standards of practice. The theory of action for this component of the system-wide framework is that if school scores on the standards of practice improve, then we believe performance on the school scorecard will also improve. As a reminder, these are the standards of practice. You also had these sent to you in the superintendent's update last Friday, and you have about a 50-page attachment, which is sort of a compendium of research, rationale, and then also details on how data is collected and how it is measured. So again, we have 3 buckets: quality instruction, quality relationships, and strategic decision. So I won't read through each of these, but these are those for high school, for middle school, for elementary school, and then early childhood, and then special programs. And again, the change from K-12 and special programs is that we've removed the quality instruction standards of practice and held on to MTSS surveys and strategic decisions. So as a reminder, this is what the dashboard looks like. There are 2 components: the standards of practice on the top, the scorecard elements on the bottom, and then we add those 2 together and then have a weighting algorithm, and at the end is a school's status as a red school, a yellow, a green, or a blue school. And our focus tonight is just on this top portion that measures the standards of practice metrics. So we're going to get right into it. These are the results. You can see on this slide, which is, there we go, it's easier for me over here. You can see on this slide that these are the results for our high school standards of practice. That first bucket, practice 1s through 4, have lower scores. The next 2 buckets have higher average scores. Middle school, same. We have 1s and 2s primarily in that first bucket under quality instruction, and then higher scores on relationships and strategic decisions. In elementary schools, we have more of a mixture. We have, of course, more schools. But you can see again, the highest scores are under quality relationships and strategic decisions. Early childhood, quality instruction, again, the lower performing scores than quality relationships and strategic decisions. So we have a theme emerging in our data. And special programs. As a point of reference, this is how schools were distributed from scores of 1.4 up to 3.0 in 0.2 increments. 16 schools were below 2.0, 26 were 2.0 to 3.0. But here's where we'll pause and linger a little bit. You can see the average score by standard. Student belonging is incomplete because the full action plan is not due until September of this year. When that comes in for every school, then this metric will be complete. We're sort of off cycle in year 1. We don't anticipate that being an issue in year 2. The employee survey had an average score of 3.8. Family survey, 3.7. Based on the score distribution and the overall high-end scores for these 2 particular measures, our rally cry team, or our system-wide framework team, believes that we need to take a look at what we're measuring and how we're measuring it, and perhaps have a higher bar moving forward in these 2 particular standards of practice. Reading Horizons is our highest scoring instructional standard of practice at 3.3. We attribute that to a couple of key moves. First was elevating the profile of Reading Horizons to a Tier 3 academic return on investment study. We've been studying it for more than 2 years now. And then finally layering on this layer of accountability through the standards of practice. Over the last 2 years, we've been developing habits, monitoring, measuring, and providing incredible professional learning support at the classroom teacher level, the PLC level, and bringing principals in as well. So we can see that we're making the most progress here on Reading Horizons. MTSS and its companion pyramid model in our early childhood centers, we're hovering around 2.3, and we're seeing a pretty wide distribution of scores when you lay out early childhood through high school. But thematically, we're seeing that some of our lowest scores are happening in our middle and high schools. And even in that score of 1 to 2, there's wide variation, how close to 2.1 versus 2.9 across our schools. We see more 3s and 4s in some of our elementary schools, and that adds up with what we've observed over the last couple of years, which is building those teams and systems and processes. We seem to have had more growth in that area in elementary than we have in middle and high. But as a reminder, the result of this scoring on this standard of practice is that every school has their score on 4 domains across a rubric. They have an action plan, and they have areas of focus for the coming year. So the partnership between our director of MTSS and our dean of MTSS and our school supervisors will ensure that schools are monitoring their progress on that action plan, and we should see some growth on this metric by next year. Our equity metric is 2.3. That is how the school uses data to drive decision-making in their school towards school improvement through the lens of targeted universalism. In other words, targeting subgroups of students in order to increase their performance, to boost their performance. And in this case, this was kind of the first year that our schools were really fully in on an equity challenge, and then learning how to operate through that equity challenge and use equity as a lens. So this is another area where we anticipate some pretty phenomenal growth next year as well. And then we get into our reds, those that are below 2. As a central office team, as an instructional team, we are not surprised by these numbers. They are pretty much what we had anticipated. And the why behind that is we've had a lot of things developed on paper, frameworks, curricula, assessments, instructional shifts that have been sort of named in the Common Core standards since 2010, but we have not had full adoption either in hearts and minds or in practice and accountability for those shifts. So by adding these into our system-wide framework, by including them in how we define a green and a blue school, we're saying that it's not just the end result that we value, but that students are getting consistent experience and opportunity and high-quality instruction through these shifts. So we have number talks and integrated math sort of together hover around 2.0. What that means in practice is what we're observing is a lot of times sort of the stage is set and the teacher talk is there, but students aren't experiencing the kind of complex problem solving and collaboration that we need to see them taking ownership of. We want to hear students talking about complex math problems with each other, questioning each other, and really digging in as mathematicians. And we're not quite there yet. But we've provided an incredible amount of professional development this summer that will continue throughout the next school year, as well as building up the capacity of our principals and assistant principals to know high-quality math instruction when they see it. High scope at a score of 1.8. We selected, from all of high scope, we selected large group and small group as 2 of the most important levers that we need to see happening in every single classroom, every single day. And we're not seeing that yet. So we have an opportunity with this baseline data to reset expectations for our early childhood classrooms and our mandated core curriculum, and really build that capacity of principals, assistant principals, instructional coaches, and classroom teachers. When our team goes around and does these observations, they do them in partnership with school leaders so that they can debrief together, talk about what they've seen, and talk about what next steps will look like. The next item on here is FSA, that stands for Focus Skills Assessments. Focus skills are those places where all sets of standards converge. They're the 3 things that we can do in every single classroom to help students become critical thinkers. And the FSA is the assessment that measures that. They are all performance-based assessments. They are built into the curriculum. They are in the units in our core curriculum. We do not have a lot of success here yet. It's at a score of 1.1. What we expect to see with this metric is that teachers have not only assigned the FSA in our platform, GoFormative, it's a digital assessment, but also that the students have completed it, that the student has done a self-assessment, and then the teacher has scored the assessment. If all of those things have not taken place, that does not count as being done. And we've seen various states of implementation. We have a lot of educating to do and informing to do about the value of the FSA and how the FSA fits within our balanced assessment system across the district. Every grade level and content area has an FSA 3 times a year, grades 6 through 12. Units of study, writing, this is one of our lowest scores. I attribute this to a couple of things. One, we know that we don't have fidelity of implementation across the district, but also there was a lot of confusion around this metric and what was being measured. So I anticipate that with sort of some cleanup and understanding there, we're going to see this metric rise pretty considerably next year. And then finally, model academies. Model academies is one that was sort of added by our system-wide framework team towards the end of the year, and it's more of a long-term goal. You don't turn on a dime and get a model academy within a couple of months, but we want to celebrate and incentivize schools for earning that, that status from NCAC. So this is one where an external validator comes in, looks at the evidence, has focus groups, observes in the school, and then an academy has model status. Schools can also earn 1 point by having a mock academy review by an internal team to prepare them for their full review with NCAC. But the common theme across all of the REDs when we talked to their central office supports is not only that we weren't surprised by these numbers, but the common sort of understanding of the data is that things have always been suggested as best practice, but we've not held either the school or the classroom accountable for implementing those practices. So our underperforming standards, I've just gone through, and you can see those average scores again there. Here are key takeaways. As I said, our curriculum items need greater focus, accountability, and partnership. Teams need to analyze how surveys are accounted for within the standards of practice. We don't want to have artificial inflation because we've selected a target that perhaps is too low, and right now we have that signal that we need to put our heads together on that. Reading Horizons focus and support is showing positive signs. And so what's next? In order to add that layer of accountability, not just for our principals, but for teachers as well, we're working as a team to focus on teacher evaluation for underperforming standards of practice. So what does it actually look like in practice, and how can we support principals and teachers in the evaluation process to have strong conversations in their pre-conference, strong areas of focus in the observation, and strong coaching in the post-conference. We have restructured the CIL, or the Curriculum Implementation Leader, for support in curriculum areas of the standard of practice. They now have a release period so that they have time to model, coach, and prepare teachers, not just to give the FSA, but in order to use that data to drive their instruction and to ensure that we're making those instructional shifts in our classrooms. And then finally, we have a process improvement for survey items within the standards of practice. That's the conclusion of the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, with the caveat that neither Mr. Zediker nor Mr. Gallagher are here, so I won't answer for them, but I'm happy to collect any questions and we can provide a follow-up report for you.
Mr. Siegel.
Thank you, Ms. Detman. I do appreciate your report, and I guess I'm going to focus on slide 19. I do understand how these results can come to be when there's been so much emphasis put on, say, something like Reading Horizons. I remember when it was presented to us to have the board choose some of those top tiers to focus on, and I was glad that Reading Horizons was one of them. But there's such a big difference in the average scores between something like Reading Horizons and units of study of writing. that I guess I just kind of always thought were two things that went hand in glove. And I guess I want to be really hopeful and say, yeah, when we put the same sort of emphasis on units of study writing, that's going to make all the difference. But it almost feels like, you're filling up a swimming pool and we put a bunch of water in on this side, and now we're going to go put water in on this side, but it's still going to be kind of this level. How do we make sure that we keep filling over here while we're filling over here too? Because I guess it kind of feels like we have the potential of losing some of that focus on reading horizons while we're trying to pour some attention into FSAs and our writing skills.
Yeah. Well, thankfully we have different people in the central office who are coordinating that support for schools, and so we don't have to sort of pull from the same energy bucket. We have different deans that are focused on FSAs than are focused on reading horizons. There are also different groups of teachers, different principals as well. But when you talk about units of study and reading horizons, that's all from elementary schools. So what we're doing with schools right now, and what Mr. Gallagher did in June with his team and all of the principals, was to do a really deep dive into their standards of practice and help them determine where are they going to focus as an individual school this year. And in some schools, it may be that they are so well positioned with reading horizons that is now institutionalized. It is how they do business in their school. They can pull some of that energy and really focus on units of study. Others might say, we know that our units of study is sort of languishing here, but we believe that right now our attention has to be on reading horizons to provide a strong foundation, and that's what we're going to do for our school improvement. So we're empowering principals with this data to set their own goals for school improvement, connecting their adult practice to their student outcomes and their universal goals. And so we're going to see different SIP cycles and different goals based on the data in each school. And that's sort of their prerogative then, is to develop that theory of action, where they're going to sort of like hedge their bets, and where they're going to align those resources to see students grow. The very short answer is, if we ask everybody to focus on everything, then they're not able to focus on anything.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I was kind of fearing.
Yeah.
I think it's been no secret that we've tried to, as an administration, you've tried to put a lot of emphasis on reading. That's the skill that allows kids to succeed in any course. And I'm glad to see that, and hitting the elementary level is absolutely the right place to do it, because that's what allows kids to succeed for the rest of their school career. I just want to make sure that that same sort of energy remains, if not continues to grow, because that does still remain the foundation for everything. It's the foundation for writing. It's the foundation for kids being able to understand math and everything else.
Yeah, and we will maintain our commitment to have Reading Horizons certified coaches in as many schools as possible, given that there is turnover at least in some part every year. We're going to continue our partnership contract with Reading Horizons as well, plus the 2 times a year coaching support. That's a part of just program implementation. So we're not taking our foot off the gas and declaring victory here on Reading Horizons, but we do have some really great signs that our habits are changing and our mindsets are changing, and we're starting to see that now just become a part of how we do things in the classroom, which is what we want to see.
And if I could just interject, I think what it comes down to here is that's why we have 8 standards of practice. That's why we gave everybody kind of a baseline year this year to experience this, but we fully expect that schools over the course of multiple years are going to continuously improve on all of these standards. And ultimately, where the board gets involved is if we look at schools that don't have the kind of climate and culture to address areas for improvement, then that's where we will look at options for how we can support the school as a district in different ways. But we believe that we have a limited enough number of practices, and they're essential enough to drive student achievement, that this is where the focus needs to be, and that we don't think at this point we have too many of them. I think this is more of a reflection of many years of us being too unfocused as a district, and now that we focused in, I expect scores to improve significantly without seeing something like Reading Horizons, which was a strength to slip back. But I think you're asking the right question, Mr. Siegel. Is this the right number of standards, and are we able to focus on these things? And I think we feel very confident that it's reasonable for schools to do the limited number of standards of practice if we support them well with the proper services.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, on 20, and maybe you said this, and I'm sorry if I missed it, how does the number of schools, the count of schools add up if you go across the rows? So you've got 227, 3, 221, 6300, and so forth. Are those supposed to add up either horizontally or vertically at some point?
So it looks like is row number 1 the one that's perplexing to you?
Row number 1 certainly drew my attention.
The math one doesn't add up?
No, it doesn't. I'm looking for where the numbers balance is.
Yes, that includes both high school. That includes high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools, because integrated math and math talks are together.
Okay.
High scope is just early childhood.
Yep.
Model academies is just 5 high schools. Units of studies, all that. So there's a logic to it.
Okay.
And we exclude special programs from that count as well. So the math gets a little confusing.
The math definitely got a little confusing. It would be helpful, if you just had notes below or something that said what you just said, because that's not real complex.
Yep, understood. Thank you.
The other thing is, I looked and now I'll never be able to find it, but where it showed by school and the various levels. That one. Is there a visual that you're going to come out with this? And the second thing is, does each principal sit down and go through those results?
Yes.
Essentially, I figured both, if you will, both up and down. So they go over it with the supervisory, and then they go over it with teachers.
Yes, they just did this work in June in their school improvement workshop over the course of 2 days. They got to see, this is live on a Decision Ed dashboard for them, and so they can click into any blue number that's underlined, and it'll take them to the data that feeds their overall score. So they can see each component, their average classroom score, et cetera, depending on the data element.
Okay. And when it comes to evaluation by supervisory staff, are they going to look at this year over year at all, or?
Do you mean the executive directors of schools?
Yes.
Supervising principals?
Yes.
Yes.
But I would add one thing that's going to be different is we will all collectively look at year-over-year improvement, as well as the score combined with how the schools do on the school scorecard as an accountability measure, as well as, and more importantly, a continuous improvement measure for all of our schools. So yes, the supervisor will be having that conversation. The school principal will be having that conversation with the faculty and staff. But we as a board and management team will be looking at this as well to look at trends across the district also.
And then, where the last group, of course, the most important is the parents. Is there a communication plan for these numbers? And
yes,
I think we've asked.
Our team is working on that now. There's a full race plan that's in development to include all stakeholders. Our communications team is working on that.
Are we going to do something with the parents at the schools, or the families, sorry, at the schools?
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, if we do a communication plan and we pull all this together, there are other events that you have at schools. right?
Oh, sure. So
I mean,
the team is doing sort of an analysis of, what kind of information parents need, when they need it, how they should get that information throughout the academic year. So they have an opportunity to ask questions about the standards of practice in their school.
Okay. When are you considering, what time of the year or under what circumstances would you go out to a school and walk through this?
I don't know what the tactic will be. The team is just now developing that. They're working on what to communicate to whom. So I don't have an answer for that at this point.
And Mr. Connor, the time that this is going to be launched is in the context of the overall school scorecard. So that will come at the end of October when the data when the data embargo ends. So we will share standard of practice as well as scorecard data as a whole, and that is what the communication plan will tie to.
That's where I was leading, is to not, not sort of take this as one little point.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
I understand. Sure. So you want to know sort of how did my school do?
That's right.
And what does that mean? And how can I ask some questions as a parent? Yeah.
I mean, I think families are going to be interested in these kinds of things, and so I caught my eye on the model academies. And I knew that would be a long road because, we've been talking about model academies now for quite a few years. I think what would help on model academies in particular is there's a whole bunch of standards, and that might be one, and I'm not, again, I would not want to add a lot of work, but I would think model academies might be worth subdividing to say we're, and I can't remember what standards are, but I'll make up. If it's 1 to 10, we're at a 2 with this academy and pathways or something, so that people can see progress. Because I think some of these, one of the things as I look at this, I think I wonder, context for the families. We see these, we've heard you talk. And talk, oh, come on, you're supposed to laugh at that.
Thank you, Mr. Connor.
That the fact is, a lot of these terms, especially for parents, MTSS is, leaps off the page. But I would think that you'd need some kind of translation as you do this. And that's why, actually, I was thinking about that. That's what actually brought me, when I was thinking about the academies and some of the detail underneath, is on some of these, it's meaningful for us as inside baseball, as they say, but for the community and the families, it really needs some translation, I think.
Yes, the audience for this particular report is certainly those of us who are sort of inside and monitoring on a sort of technical level. But like I mentioned, the team is working on some parent-friendly language and parent-friendly materials to share what we have to offer. Yeah,
and my compliments. I mean, this is really comprehensive, and I will just say that from when I started on the board, I mean, really, these are major leaps forward, as well as the whole idea of having the accountability at the school. So I'm not, critical of this. I'm just saying that this is something I think that's important enough to be translated so that families understand the impact of all this. And why some things are, I mean, it's interesting to me, if I might say so, that we spent a bit of time explaining Reading Horizons, and it turns out that it's one of the stronger points, which I think is pretty interesting. And and as I think, as Mr. Siegel pointed out, we've had a lot of emphasis on that. And I think it might be helpful when you give status to the board to say things like that. We're really more focused on, the math part or whatever. And so you might see that grow a little bit. That commentary, I know whenever you comment, frankly, it helps me because it puts it in context. So that would be the other thing that I'd like to see.
Thank you.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes, looking at the action steps that are listed for what's next, the first bullet point stood out to me, and could we get a little bit more elaboration on what that step will look like, and will that also include any type of principal evaluation?
So I think I can jump in on this one, Ms. Mohammed. Excellent question. So if you zoom out on this work, what we've started out here really pertains to district accountability and school leadership accountability. So schools, as you remember, are going to be red, yellow, green, or blue based on how they perform on these standards of practice and also how they do on their state tests. So how they do on those big metrics that the state measures combined with these local measures we came up with is how the school principal and the schools will be accountable. What we don't want to see happen is the district office or individual people working in the schools like teachers or social workers or school counselors or attendance specialists. We want everyone to know what their role is. So what you're going to see from me coming up, I've been working with Board President McCulloch on an early draft that I'm going to be sharing with the board once it's refined of what my focus is going to be, my CEO-centric target for the year. And this is really coming from that. Teacher and staff alignment with this work is going to be really important. So what we are going to plan to do is make sure our principals, assistant principals, teachers, and staff are ready to make sure that as principals are accountable for doing better in the standards of practice, that individual employees know what their job is. And I think that's going to be the key here. If everybody in the organization is rowing in the same direction around these standards of practice, we're much more likely to avoid what Mr. Siegel put out, which is kind of that I would use a different analogy, almost the child's game whack-a-mole, where we focus on one thing and then the other thing pops up and then we go over here. I think if we have really consistent, high-quality evaluation conversations, and I don't mean in a gotcha way, but I mean in a developmental way, in a supportive way, and our focus stays where it needs to be, we're likely to see long-term success. So what you're going to be able to expect from me is on a high level that I'm going to make that a priority of making sure that every teacher in this district and every employee in this district can see how they fit into this as well. Then it's not just me and the board and the principals that feel the urgency. It's all of us know how we can help. So that's what's coming next.
Thank you. And just to piggyback off of that, one more question. So do you anticipate that we'll be able to begin that process this school year? Or will that be something that will be long-term?
That will be this school year. That was the beauty of allowing schools to practice this year. So these are all things that schools have had the opportunity to try for, in many cases, for 3-4 years without an accountability or alignment effort in place. And we've really realized that we need to be much more explicit. So you will see our principal retreat on August 11th and 12th. We'll be focused on getting our assistant principals and principals ready to do this work. And Teacher Institute Day will be very heavily focused on making sure teachers and staff know what their role is. And it won't stop there. That will be where it's introduced, and then those conversations will continue throughout the course of the year. But we have to make this what's on everybody's mind. These are the basic things, these standards of practice that we committed to all children getting, and you can see by our results that's just not the case right now. So until that is the case, we can't really evaluate whether we have the right curriculum or assessments because we aren't implementing them with fidelity. So the way to do that, in my opinion, is first to make sure it's clear to the principals and the board and at this high level, but then this year immediately, we need to then make sure that teachers and all of our other staff are part of that as well. So it'll be this year.
Thank you.
So I just have one, I guess, comment, concern. What I'm hearing on the focus skills assessments, so those are actually developed downtown, right, in the curriculum departments?
They're developed with the curriculum implementation leaders.
So what I hear is that the quality of those FSAs is uneven, and some of that came through on the survey results that the board received. This is one of the comments. Their curriculum department needs improvement. Assessments are non-existent or lack rigor. The curriculum websites promote low rigor activities, lack a structure for planning and preparing classroom content, and do not provide necessary materials for high level instruction. And there is embedded throughout the comments, I think, concerns about particular areas of the curriculum, more about some areas than in other areas. And I do actually think that focusing on making sure that the FSAs are being implemented correctly ultimately is the right direction to go and will produce results. But I also want to make sure that if we're getting feedback that we're not providing really high quality FSAs, that somebody is listening to that and taking it seriously.
We have a process in every content area. That's the expectation that after we administer each assessment, the CILs are they're the data gatherers. They send out an opportunity for every teacher to provide feedback. They then have a work time with their dean. They review the assessment that they've just given. They have time to make changes so that when this assessment comes around the next year, it's ready to go. They also have 8 days of work at the end of the year in June to again take all that feedback and make improvements. So there are some areas where teachers are more vocal and some areas where teachers are less vocal. So the volume of feedback is not the same across every course or content area. But when we have feedback, we act on it and revise.
Okay. Ms. Pearson?
Yes, so in terms of accountability, will the execution of this be a part of performance evaluation?
Excellent question. I think I'll jump into that one. So first of all, this is like our big bet we're making, that if we do these well, these standards of practice, that schools will perform well on state tests. And if that happens, then I'm going to hit the goals that are in my contract. So the accountability starts with me. Then for me, it goes down to the school level. We have 41 district-led schools and 3 charter schools. The charter schools have 100% of their accountability just on how they do. They don't have standards of practice. They just have their state test scores. But for everybody else, they have a percentage of how they do this work, which they have a lot of control over actually at the school level. So a principal is going to be accountable for, depending on what type of school it is, 50% of this will be how the school is evaluated, up to a lower amount in, for example, a special program. It's only 25% for the standards of practice, and 75% is on the scorecard. So it varies, and we'll keep going over that with the board. So principals are accountable. And then as you look at that first bullet point, teacher evaluation, but also staff evaluation, what we're going to focus on this year, we're not going to have new evaluation instruments. That's all contractually laid out, but we are going to be able to, those evaluations are written flexibly enough that there just happens to be an entire section of the Danielson teacher evaluation tool that we use that is about how you use common formative assessments for instruction, which is FSAs. So what's really great about all this is, yes, we are going to have everybody find out how they can be accountable, but if we roll this out correctly, and that's a big if, it's going to take a lot of work in the next few months to do this. Teachers and staff should not feel like any of this is new, and they should not feel blindsided by it as that accountability comes up. So the answer is everyone is accountable, but I think everyone is going to be accountable in a way that is appropriate and supportive. I hope we can collectively, starting at the top here at the board and management team level, set a tone that this is not only about outcomes, but is also about continuous improvement. And I think that is going to be the key message embedded in that accountability, is that we are not only focused on getting a better score for each school, but we are also focused on, if we were a 1.2 last year in FSA implementation, let's be a 2 this year. Let's show that we're getting better. Because I think what I have consistently seen from this Board of Education is a desire, an urgency for results, but a willingness to celebrate incremental success. And I think that's going to be a key balance that we have to continue to strike. If we expect everybody to be a 4 all across the board next year, we are probably going to be disappointed. But I think equally we should expect significant improvement across the board and show that each school is making progress, and more importantly, that we as a district office are improving in our standards of service to support the schools, because we're accountable too. So I think you should see that across the district.
Thank you.
Are there any questions about this? Okay, thank you, Mrs. Detman.
And as you may imagine, that concludes my report, Mr. Rollins.
Thank you. We are now on to items that proceeded through the Performance and Monitoring Committee. Item 5A is the Smart Board donation. We talked about this at the Committee of the Whole. Is there a motion and a second to approve item 5A, Smart Board donation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? If not, please call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 2 absent.
The next item is 5B, the Chicago Bears Gatorade Junior Training Camp Program in Rockford Public Schools. This is being brought by Dawn Williamson, Director of Athletics, but we also talked about this at Committee of the Whole. Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Have we cashed that really big check yet? Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 2 absent.
Are there any follow-up items from the Performance and Monitoring Committee? Actually, Ms. Stanford is gone. I don't even know who would answer that question. I'm assuming none. Okay.
There are no follow-up items
Okay,
from the
thank you.
Performance Monitoring Committee.
We are now on to items that proceeded through the Planning and Development Committee. Item 6A, resolution and notice of public hearing on the tentative budget for 2022-2023. We discussed this at the Committee of the Whole as well. Is there a motion, a second to approve item 6A, resolution and notice of public hearing on the tentative budget for 2022-2023?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 2 absent.
The next item is the board president's announcements and report and action on items that proceeded through the governance committee. There's one item here, the annual review of the monthly board calendar. Yeah, that doesn't require it. Yeah. Any questions about it? Okay. Moving swiftly along. We are now on the consent portion of our meeting, which includes items previewed by the board committee chairs during the Committee of the Whole meeting. Item 8, consent agenda for the Performance and Monitoring Committee. 8A, payroll. 8B, accounts payable. 8C, purchase orders fiscal year 22. 8D, purchase order fiscal year 23. 8E, air travel. 8F, construction pay request log. 8G, ADI professional learning. 8H, foundational digital tools, Google Book Creator. 8I, Constellation New Energy Utilities Contract. 8J, Paradod. 8K, STAR Autism Support Curriculum and Training. 8L, Consolidated Contracts. 8M, RFP 23-01, Travel Agency Services. 8N, IFB 23-02, Administration Building AV Equipment. 8O, IFB 23-11, Administration Building Elevator Upgrades. 9, Consent Items Planning and Development Committee. 9A, Handle with Care MOU, adding the Winnebago County Sheriff's Office. 9B, 317 Art Collective, that's an ARP ESSER fund matter. 9C, Northwest Community Center, also ARP ESSER. 9D, Rockford Park District at Washington Park, also ARP ESSER. 9E, Scholastic Consulting Agreement. 10, Consent Items Governance Committee. 10A, Meeting Minutes from June 28th, 2022. 10B, Contract Purchase Orders for fiscal year 22. 10C, Contract Purchase Orders for fiscal year 23. 10D, Memorandum of Understanding Nutrition Services Uniforms with AFSCME Local 3210. Item 10E, Settlement Agreement, Testing Services Corporation. 10F, Workers' Compensation Settlement Agreement. And 10G, Freedom of Information Log. Is there a motion, a second, to approve the consent items?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? I don't know who was first, so I'm going to go down the line. Mr. Siegel, I just promoted you.
I like doctor, that's great. 9B, C, and D.
9B, C, and D. Okay, Ms. Mohammed, did you have your light on?
I was going to say 9D as well.
Okay. Mr. Connor?
Yeah, mine would be 8H.
Is that it? I don't see any other lights. Okay. Please call the roll on the approval of consent items not pulled.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes?
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 2 absent.
I will now ask for a motion and a second to approve item 8H, foundational digital tools.
So moved.
Second.
Questions, comments?
Yeah, the only reason I pulled this, and I had thought of this question later, is there have been a number of questions about security around Google, and I wondered if there's any comment from the technology department about what seems to me we have a fair dependence on Google all the way around, which in some ways makes sense because having a standard always helps. But because in the marketplace there have been a number of questions, and there's even a company that has a lot of commercials around security for Google. So I wanted to bring that one up.
Sure. So when we looked at this close, the primary concern was the class action lawsuit for the biometrics for Google, and that's primarily associated with the Google Photos application, which we do not use for education in the district. It is open, but we do not use it. Google has settled that for the most part from a compensation perspective, but what they've also done is pulled metadata out of the biometrics, which what they were doing was facial recognition. If you had a photo uploaded to Google, they would see who else matched. So they're pulling that off the photos over the last 2 years. So that, and then going forward, there'll be a notification as far as an opt-out whether you want that to happen. So they've, for the most part, settled that concern.
Yeah, I think the one thing that, as a district, I'd like us to be aware of is that out in the marketplace, there's been a number of security concerns, and I know that there have been some school districts that have had challenges about people wondering about things like reporting and what's happening with student data. And I know that we have good practice that we've implemented, but I really think that one of the aspects, because security and privacy in particular are such big topics right now, I'd like to make sure that as we go through and we have even some standard tools, and I brought it up for Google because we use it so extensively, and there's been a lot of questions, but I think it would be nice as a footnote if going forward we at least acknowledged that we've looked into the privacy side, because I really want to make sure that the community in general, but particularly families, feel secure, and teachers feel secure about what we're doing on the privacy side and any security.
Yeah, so we have a very well documented and well thought out plan on when we look at software coming in or things that we're renewing from a compliance perspective. One of the things we've actually added this year was vendor management, not only what they're doing with our data, but are they securing that in the event that they are attacked with ransomware or something as well. So that's something we've been very, very diligent on, and Matt Johnson and his team for the information security, IT security side has done a fantastic job of putting that protocol together for us.
All right, that is good to hear because, and thank you for bringing up about the security of data that others have. Just for the board's sake, being in corporate America, one of the big trends right now is worrying about third-party packages, especially if you use it, let's say, in human resources, finances, all front-end applications. So that actually is a very hot topic, is both the transmission of the data out to third parties, and is that secure once it's there, and if I might say so, the disposal of data once you end the relationship. And I know there's a lot of good practice in IT, so it's not any kind of implication here, but I think one of the things is, as these topics become more visible, and certainly the hacking has continued out in the marketplace, I think it would be good to remind people that that is one of our priorities, is that any choice, not only is it educationally sufficient, it's sufficient for privacy and the rest. So all that just from Google Creator, I know, but.
There's a motion and a second on the floor. I don't see any other lights on. Please call the roll.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 2 absent.
I'm going to take 9D separately, but can we take 9B and C together, Mr. Siegel? Okay, then I will ask for a motion and a second to approve items 9B and 9C.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion about those items?
Just a question. I had asked Ms. Detman if she could give us just a really brief high-level overview of how the summer programs being funded by Art Besser are proceeding with things like student attendance, adult engagement, and just how things are going.
I think I misunderstood your question, because I can give you a high level of our district programs, but I can't give you a high level of our community partner programs. Maureen is the best suited to provide that data and information. She's at a conference tonight, collecting, lots of awards with the communication team. But I'm sure that we can provide follow-up at our next board meeting.
I'm sorry I wasn't more clear earlier. That's my mistake. We can proceed.
If there are no other questions, please call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 2 absent.
I will now take a motion and a second to approve item 9D, Rockford Park District at Washington Park.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Ms. Mohammed?
Abstain.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
The motion passes with 4 yeses, 1 abstain, 2 absent.
Thank you. We are now at the closed session consent agenda, including 11A, appointment of Cyrus Wimberly as 10-month high school dean assigned to Jefferson. 11B, appointment of Kelsey Scarpetta as 10-month elementary dean assigned to Riverdale. 11C, appointment of Christy Garnhart as 10-month elementary assistant principal assigned to Lewis Lemon. 11D, appointment of Carol Egan as 10-month assistant principal assigned to Flynn Middle School. 11E, salary adjustment for 11-month principal Daniela Bohr assigned to Lathrop Elementary. 11F, appointment of Valerie Simon as 12-month program administrator for student services at the administration building. 11G, appointment of Ronnie Sturm as 12-month director of health services at the administration building. 11H, appointment of Dr. Antoine Reed as 12-month chief diversity, equity, and inclusion officer at the administration building. 11I, HR organization report and addendum. Item 12, closed session consent items, discipline, suspension, appeals, and expulsions. 12A, GDM 456422, expelled for the entire 2022-2023 school year. Item 13, closed session consent items, student discipline EIAs. 13A, GDM 8680-22 will be on an EIA. I don't have anything more specific here. Is there a motion and second to approve the closed session consent items?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any closed session consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? I would like 11I pulled. So please call the roll on the approval of closed session consent items not pulled.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 2 absent.
I will now take a motion and a second to approve item 11I, HR organizational report and addendum.
So moved.
Second.
Would the coordinator please call the roll?
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Abstain.
Ms. Mohammed?
Yes.
The motion passes with 4 yeses, 1 abstain, 2 absent.
That brings us to other business, new business, agenda recommendations, board member action steps. We need to get a report on the ARP-ESSER, how the ARP-ESSER programs are doing. That will be brought forth at the next board meeting, I understand. Does anybody else have anything to add to the agenda that we want to talk about tonight? If there are no further comments or agenda recommendations by the board, I'll take a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy your summer evening. And turn in your exit slips.